And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of After the Gold. And this week we're going to be covering a really interesting Best Picture follow-up and just how much it is different from the movie that won Best Picture. Really excited to talk about this, its production history, what I thought of it when I was covering the Oscars at the time, making these videos back in 2018, and discuss why I think it is one of the most rewatchable movies of the past 10 years. But without further ado, if you're new to this channel, welcome. What I've been doing every single week is talking about a movie that was made by a director right after winning Best Picture. So we'll cover The Hurt Locker. Catherine Bigelow wins Best Picture for that. And then her next movie, Zero Dark 30. We're interested in Zero Dark 30. We'll talk about kind of the production history, how it got made, where it was at the time, what's the modern day reputation maybe of the movie, how did it compare to the movie previously that won Best Picture, and then at the second half of the video, just giving my thoughts on the movie. All these movies I think at the very least are interesting, or have some sort of merit, or maybe are really good, which is why there's no real order to this series. We're kind of jumping around from the 60s, the 2010s to the 90s. We'll kind of jump around all the time. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you've seen this movie, if you've seen maybe 12 Years a Slave, what your thoughts are on Steve McQueen. If you have any other suggestions potentially on other Best Picture follow-ups that you'd be interested in seeing me cover, I take those into consideration as well. And yeah, just overall hope you enjoy the video. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with that production history. So the movie we're covering today is 2018's Widows, directed by Steve McQueen, the follow-up to his Best Picture winning 12 Years a Slave back in 2013. And the main reason why I wanted to cover this movie is because I really like the movie, and because I was covering the Oscars during this period of time. If you don't know, I've got a series called Old's Oscar Countdown, the flagship series on this channel, in which I predict the Oscars, and have been doing so now for 9 seasons. And this was one of my earlier seasons, the 2018 season. I remember going to TIFF that year. I didn't see Widows, but kind of was a part of the buzz and the reception at the time, and was interested to see kind of how it was maybe in the conversation and then quickly was lumped out of the conversation. But before we jump into the release of Widows, let's jump back a bit to 2013's 12 Years a Slave to see how this movie got to be made. 12 Years a Slave, I think, I was still watching the Oscars at the time, kind of a burgeoning young film fan and an Oscar-loving fan. And I remember the way at least I think about it today, it was the same way I think about it at the time, which was that it's one of the few times that a respected movie won the Oscar. Sometimes when we see movies that are really well respected but not beloved, Roma, let's say, but the Oscar still goes to Green Book, or a movie like The Revenant, very well respected, technically well made movie, but the passion was behind Spotlight, so it went and eventually got Best Picture. It's an interesting kind of a case point when the Academy was small enough, and the pervasive narrative of things like narratives and the pervasive nature of things like narratives really did have a stranglehold on the Academy, because the Academy was mostly people from Hollywood or people from New York. So there was a sense of, if Julianne Moore, was going to win for Still Alice, this is her time, and she had no competition, and she went on and won the Oscar. In the same way, 12 Years a Slave, I think, was such a difficult movie to watch and had such a hard subject matter that I don't know if anyone really was super passionate about the movie, and yet it was so well made and so well done, and about such a serious topic matter that people felt that it was necessary, it was kind of deserving of the award, and it was so well respected that people kind of eventually went to it, and they felt almost pressure to not vote for it because it seemed like such an important movie to vote for. And yeah, I don't know if 12 Years a Slave if that was released, let's say, this year, if that would have necessarily happened. It's an interesting kind of a focal point within the Oscars. I think that's kind of its modern day reputation too. Unlike something like Widows, I don't know how rewatchable a movie this is. I don't know the modern day reputation of 12 Years a Slave will increase over time. I think it's going to kind of continue to stay as a well-respected, well-made movie from an expert filmmaker in the case of Steve McQueen. And then what's also interesting about this movie from a production point of view is that it was the first movie that kind of put Plan B on the map. This is Brad Pitt's production company. He had done stuff and been nominated before for like a movie like Moneyball, but he was in that. This is the first time when Brad Pitt actually won his first Oscar for Best Picture for 12 Years a Slave. Not a lot of people know that. And, you know, we talk about Moonlight or Beale Street Could Talk and the kind of continued dominance of Plan B at the Oscars throughout the 2010s. It really kind of cements themselves as a major Oscar player, really in 2013, winning here for 12 Years a Slave. I know Brad Pitt is also in this movie, but it really isn't his movie versus something like Moneyball. Oftentimes you'll see actors also produce their own movies that they're in, but this was a kind of a situation where Brad Pitt went past that with his company in Plan B, because he's technically in 12 Years a Slave, but it's a very small role, and now he's producing movies that he's not in from interesting filmmakers and kind of got that reputation over the years. And it's a movie that's so well respected that movies directly about slavery ever since the movie has been released haven't performed as well. It was almost like it's such a good movie that no one really wants to try it again. And you think of Emancipation or Antebellum or Birth of a Nation. They were all kind of movies that were set up to potentially be Oscar movies, except for Antebellum. That was kind of more like a horror twist on it. But they never really worked at critically or the box office. It is kind of an interesting point where maybe we've moved past that as a culture, whereas in the past, for many black actors and black filmmakers, they were only subjected to being able to make slavery movies. Those were the only movies that kind of would resonate at the Oscars. But now it seems like maybe we've gone past that, or maybe 12 Years a Slave was such a well done version of that we don't necessarily want to return to that well, or if we do return to that well, it has to be some sort of a twist on it. Emancipation, more of an action-based movie, or Antebellum, the horror bend, kind of seeing that topic through the lens of genre maybe is the modern-day reputation. But we're talking about Widows today, and what I find so fascinating about Widows is you have this movie in 12 Years a Slave, respected drama, serious, and his next follow-up is a action movie. It actually reminds me of what a lot of times actors do after winning the Oscar. You see, directors, when they win the Oscar, and we've seen this over the past few episodes we've covered, they kind of do a repeat oftentimes of what they won the Best Picture for. Catherine Bigelow makes The Hurt Locker, Iraq War movie, 2012's Zero Dark 30 makes a Middle East war movie with the CIA. So like there's a direct connection there. Or David Lean, Bridge on the River Kwai, period piece, wartime movie. Lawrence of Arabia, period piece, wartime movie, epic scale. They've got a lot of similarities that way. But Steve McQueen doesn't do that. He could have made another stately drama. As a matter of fact, if most recently last year's 2023's Blitz, if that came out right after 12 Years a Slave, that would make sense as a Best Picture follow-up, in the conversation. For Best Picture, period piece, World War II movie, kind of an Oscar-leaning movie. But no, he makes Widows. An actor's kind of trajectory, where an actor like Nicolas Cage will make Leaving Las Vegas, and then he does a bunch of action movies. Or Brie Larson will do The Room, win an Oscar, and then jumps right into superhero movies. Even someone like a Jennifer Lawrence wins the Oscar, and then is kind of doing a lot of Hunger Games and X-Men action movies for the next few years. That is a trajectory and an elevation for an actor, but directors, you don't always see that. And while I'm really appreciative of Widows, maybe it was the wrong decision to make from an Oscars point of view, because the movie comes out, premieres at TIFF, gets pretty good reviews, but pretty quickly gets lumped into the this isn't really an awards movie bucket, and gets no Oscar nominations, wasn't really in the conversation, was always kind of pitched as, oh, this is a commercial follow-up, this isn't necessarily something that needs to be respected by the Oscars. And as a result, I think it had just an odd situation and an odd release where it comes out and it makes okay money, doesn't really become a huge success, but I don't think it was a total failure. I think the studio wanted maybe a little bit more prestige, which it didn't get, and it didn't make enough money at the box office, so it's kind of in this weird middle ground. So you see why a lot of studios these days don't want to make the kind of $40 to $70 million budget movie, because it's hard to necessarily lump it into one of the groups of, is this an action blockbuster or is this an Oscar movie that's going to get us awards? So it is a unique situation where he almost made a kind of 90s elevated heist movie at a time in which studios didn't really want to make those types of movies, and the only reason he probably made it is because his last movie won Best Picture. So it's a little bit of an odd use of his kind of blank check, but something I'm very happy that he did, because I think not only do I like the movie, and I liked it at the time, but it's definitely increased in my estimation as I've constantly kind of been wanting to and thought about it and gone back to it as I've rewatched the movie. But I think that's its modern day reputation. In an odd way, I think there's more passion for a movie like Widows than there is necessarily 12 Years a Slave, because when you think of movies in this genre, oftentimes they don't necessarily do well at the box office or aren't appreciated right away. Heist movies like The Town or Den of Thieves, or the accountant action movies, they do well on streaming and kind of build up reputation and appreciation over time. And I think Widows is kind of in that bucket where I'd be interested to see, I haven't checked, but I think probably if you could see how many times someone had rewatched a movie on, let's say, Letterboxd, people would rewatch Widows more times than they watch 12 Years a Slave. And then at the end, on a kind of grand scale of cinema, it'd be interesting to see in 50 years' time, will Widows be considered maybe Steve McQueen's best movie and 12 Years a Slave isn't? We do kind of see that in parts where, Goodfellas, let's say, is the premier Martin Scorsese movie because it's rewatchable. Even though a movie like Raging Bull was so well respected at the time, it's kind of hard to rewatch. So it kind of has maybe decreased in estimation a little bit versus some of Scorsese's more pop movies. I don't know if that's going to happen with McQueen necessarily, but it is an interesting kind of a path and trajectory to go on. But now transitioning more into my thoughts on the film, I did want to cover this movie because I like it so much. It's a movie that is super rare, we mentioned, in terms of its budget level, but also in terms of an expert filmmaker making a kind of pulpy genre movie like this. I think it's got a really entertaining story at its heart with those kind of twists and turns in a genre I like, in this case of a heist movie with a really interesting kind of premise and idea. But then Steve McQueen is such an expert filmmaker in the way he blocks scenes and the way he shoots and lights scenes and the actors he casts and some of the themes he wants to bring in, and kind of is able to elevate this kind of a script in this genre. So it's really just a genre that I really like, really well told, really expertly made, which just makes it even better and makes it even more entertaining. And it is interesting because it's a movie that has some issues, I still think. At the time, though, what's interesting about rewatchable movies is I could look at the reviews at the time and read them and go, I kind of agree with a lot of these reviews. There probably is maybe one too many ideas stuffed into the movie. There's a lot going on, maybe one too many reveals. And yet, when you think about rewatching the movie, you don't think about the kind of small issues with the story. You think of just kind of the scenes that you like or the characters that you like. And those are the things that kind of rise to the top. So when I think about the movie, I think about how incredible the cast is, first and foremost. What's so great about these genre movies is that you can have so many great character actors. One guy be the driver, one guy be the kind of bank teller, or you can kind of populate them with so many great kind of interesting faces. And what's awesome about this movie is that they almost don't have character actors, as they just have, A-list actors in key roles. Liam Neeson in a really small role, Colin Farrell, even you could argue, getting Brian Tyree Henry and Daniel Kaluuya right as they're about to kind of break out. And some of my personal favorites being Daniel Kaluuya. This may be my favorite performance of his, super menacing, super scary Elizabeth Debicki. I love how McQueen doesn't shy away from how tall she is. She's so incredibly striking in this movie. So it's just fun in all these different scenes where you're not missing out when we're not watching the widows plan their heist, because we're seeing, two amazing actors in Colin Farrell and Robert Duvall go at it, or Brian Tyree Henry and Daniel Kaluuya kind of go back and forth. There is so much enjoyment I find just from watching these actors act in these scenes and bring their emotion to it. And then I think it's also one of the best looking movies of the past few years. Sean Bobbitt is a personal favorite cinematographer of mine, and this may be his best work. He works really well with Steve McQueen and is able to kind of have some kind of wide shot frames, but essentially frames within frames, where we'll have the actual frame, but then within the shot itself, there's maybe like a cutout of a a back room that you can kind of see into, or a doorway, or things like that. Really interesting composition, especially sometimes when they move into handheld camera. It's not necessarily handheld as it is Steadicam, so there's a sense of kind of clean precision and propulsion to a lot of the movie in some of these scenes. And then sometimes it switches to more like documentary style, where we're shooting over shoulders and in long lenses. And like I'm thinking of the scene with Elizabeth Debicki when she's trying to buy a gun, or she's walking out and eating a hot dog. Certain images like that I think are really indelible in the movie. And also I think the movie is great, and it's because it shoots in real locations. There is a strong sense of presence and place within this movie of the two worlds, the rich world and the poor world, set here in Chicago. Great kind of iconic locations. I'm thinking of the gymnasium and in that scene. It's just a regular gym, but the way they kind of light things, or even the decision to shoot it in a gym. Then, of course, the kind of mega church, but then also the bowling alley in the back of the bar. Small kind of odd situations, but really unique, interesting locations that we're kind of constantly in and going towards. And then, of course, I still do appreciate all the stuff that McQueen is trying to fit into this movie, particularly with the three women and the fact that they just lost their husbands and the grief that they kind of have to go towards, on top of kind of the burden that they're faced with, and the different kinds of ideologies of not wanting to get too attached, but having, developing a relationship because of this kind of a common bond. It is a interesting movie in some of the themes that it's trying to bring in on an emotional level, but also kind of on a societal, political level of politics and crime and a connection between that. It is interesting in that regard, and I do appreciate those kind of themes that McQueen is trying to bring into it as well. But overall, I think this is a really interesting, really fun movie, elevated action movie that looks great with some of the best cast, maybe the best cast of the past 10 years. I mean, it's right up there if you just list off all the great, amazing, female actors and male actors. It really is an exciting movie for a bunch of reasons. But definitely a movie, an odd movie to be made after 12 Years a Slave, but definitely a movie that is deserving of having been made after The Gold. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this movie, on Steve McQueen's films, and if you want to see any other particular movies covered on this channel, I'd be really open to hearing those comments and maybe weaving them into my schedule. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.